Chapter 3 of the Adventures of the 11 Cuff Buttons. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tom Davis Beale. The Adventures of the 11 Cuff Buttons by James Francis Thierry. Chapter 3. Thud, 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 biff, rattle, bang, came a noise from below. I sat bolt upright in bed and hollered through the pitch darkness at the top of my voice. "Help! Police! Burglars! Robbers! Wake up, Holmes, and catch 'em!" Despite the racket I made, which was increased by my jumping out of bed and falling headfirst over a chair, upsetting the ladder, the hardened old cuss slept on. When I yelled again and shook him by the shoulder, he half opened his eyes and said, "Well, what's eating you, Watson? Got the nightmare? I told you that you took too much mince pie last night." "For heaven's sake! Didn't you hear the noise downstairs, Holmes?" I shouted. "Somebody is breaking in, trying to steal the Earl's last pair of diamond cuff buttons." Holmes yawned lazily, rolled over in bed, and said, as he settled himself to sleep again, "Well, I can't help it, Watson. I was hired to work in the daytime, not at night. I guess the excitement will keep till morning." And, would you believe it, I couldn't get another word out of him. I looked at my watch by the moonlight and found that it was 13 minutes after 2 a.m. Then, thinking I might get a sight of the burglar from our bedroom window, I drew the heavy old-fashioned curtains aside and peered out over the silent landscape 30 feet below. But I couldn't see a blamed thing but trees and grass, and a moss-covered stone wall out by the road, the Earl's bulldog not being in evidence anywhere. I knelt down by the window, put my elbows on the sill, and resolved to wait there a while, to see if the nocturnal disturber would hike out again. Apparently I fell asleep in this attitude, for the next thing I knew, Holmes, fully dressed, was bending over me with a grin on his face, and it was broad daylight. "Well, why don't you wake yourself up, Doc? It's 8 o'clock, he said. Then I arose sheepishly and dressed. After our ablutions in the laboratory next door, where we helped ourselves to a bottle of whiskey we found in a medicine cabinet on the wall, we descended the 2 flights of stairs to the main floor. Finding nobody around, we walked through the different rooms on an exploring tour, seeking evidences of the disturbance the night before. "Say, they evidently don't use alarm clocks with this shack, Watson. Not a thing stirring yet," said Holmes, as we came to a room with the door slightly ajar. "Well, what's this?" he exclaimed, as we entered the room. "His lordship must have retired in a rather submerged condition. Look at him there." I was surprised to see the noble air of all the Puttinghams lying on the floor of his bedroom, flat on his back, his eyes closed, and with one foot resting on an overturned chair, and horrified, as I came closer, to see a large purple bruise on his forehead, and a heavy iron poker laying on the floor beside him. The diamond cuff button was also gone from his right cuff, but the rays of the morning sun coming through the east windows shone on the other glittering bauble, still in his left cuff. Holmes very unconcernedly took a cigarette out of his pocket and lit it, his eyes meanwhile glancing about the room, but I dropped on my knees beside the Earl and placed my ear over his chest. To my horror, I could not hear even the faintest heartbeat. My face paled as I looked up at my companion. "Holmes," I said solemnly, "the Earl is dead. Murder has been added to robbery here." "That's so, Doc?" queried the cold-blooded old cuss, blowing out a cloud of cigarette smoke and yawning. "Well, what'll I do first, magnifying glass or tape measure?" "Holmes," I remonstrated sharply, unable to contain myself at his manner. "If you had come down here 6 hours ago when we heard that noise, we might have caught the criminals. Now it's too late." I turned to examine the bruise on the Earl's forehead. "Oh, keep your shirt on, Watson," retorted Holmes. "I'm not the Earl's private bodyguard, and what's more, I'm not concerned with what might be, but with what is. Are you sure he's dead, or are you only making another awkward mistake? 'Twould be rather embarrassing, I should think, to have the Earl wake up in a minute and tell us he's not dead." At this insult to my professional ability as a physician, I got on my ear, and I said with a grouch, "Well, if you don't think he's dead, just see whether you can detect any heartbeat there, smart as you are." Holmes was bending down over the apparent corpse when we heard someone walking along the corridor outside. "Quick, Watson, sneak into this closet here and observe developments," whispered Holmes, as he gripped me by the arm and hustled me into the closet, the door of which stood slightly ajar. In a moment more, her ladyship, Annabel, Countess of Puddingham, appeared in the Earl's room, took one look at her husband's recumbent form on the floor, and let out a scream that might have been heard in the next county before she toppled over in a dead faint. Holmes rushed out of the closet, seized her just in time to prevent her falling over the Earl's body, and whispered to me, as he placed her propped up in a chair, and as various people were heard running through the other rooms towards us, attracted by the Countess's scream. Well, she didn't have a hand in this, Doc. That scream was genuine, and she didn't know we were listening either. A small crowd of servants, all gaping in amazement, now filled the doorway, and Holmes asked authoritatively, "Which one of you people is the Earl's valet?" adding, "You had better lay your master on the bed there." One of the men stepped forward and answered, "I am the Earl's valet, sir. Is his lordship dead?" "Well, Dr. Watson says he is, but lay him out on the bed anyhow. He will look more respectable there than on the floor," said Holmes, as Vermicelli, the valet, assisted by another man who said he was Peter Van Dam, valet to Lord Lancelot, picked up the Earl's body and deposited it, or him, on the bed. Lancelot, Uncle Tooter, Bud, Hicks, and Thornycroft here crowded themselves into the room and, on seeing what had happened, added to the general buzz of excited exclamations. But Holmes took command of the situation, like the old hand that he was, entirely used to such gruesome sights, and stepped to the telephone on a small table in one corner of the Earl's room. "Give me the constables, any of them, at Hedge Guntherridge, quick!" he called through the instrument. "This one of the constables?" After a moment. "The Earl of Puddingham has apparently been murdered by someone attempting to steal the last one of his diamond cuff buttons. Hemlock Holmes, from London, talking. Have all of your men come up here at once and surround the place, letting no one in or out. Whom do I suspect? Never mind whom I suspect. I'd never suspect you constables of having too much brains after the way you left here yesterday noon, with the castle unguarded. That's a cinch. Now don't take all day getting here. Goodbye." And Holmes slammed the receiver back on the hook, whirled around in his chair, and faced the gaping crowd of people in the room. "Well, what are you looking at?" he demanded. "Get together there, some of you, and bring order out of chaos. You there, with the vacant look on your face, are you the Countess's maid?" addressing one of the 3 woman servants. "Take care of your mistress there in that chair. Can't you see she's coming out of her faint? If the cook is among you, he'd better get back to the kitchen and prepare breakfast. Watson, you take this revolver here," fishing a 6-shooter out of his pocket and handing it to me. "Go to the rear entrance of the castle and stand guard there till those tortoise-like constables arrive. Let no one in or out, and I will do the same at the front entrance. Do you get me, Steve?" Holmes jumped up, full of renewed pep, and boldly pushed those of the friends and servants of the deceased Earl who didn't move quickly right out of the room into the corridor, the Countess having been assisted in the meantime up to her own room on the 2nd floor by her Spanish maid. "I say there, Holmes, don't you think you're going it pretty strong?" protested Billy Budd, the man from Australia, as he was shoved along with the rest of them by the masterful detective. "Just keep your shirt on, Mr. Budd," said the latter, as he locked the door of the Earl's room behind him and put the key in his pocket. "I'm running this show, not you. I was sent here to get results, and I'm going to get 'em, see?" "I guess the old cocaine is beginning to work on him again," I muttered. Then I started with the gun to the rear door of the castle, while Holmes, after overawing the others, stationed himself at the front door, another loaded and cocked revolver in his hand. After about 15 minutes of tiresome waiting, while several of the servants peeped out at me from the rear rooms as I stood sentinel at the end of the corridor, just inside the great iron-barred door, I heard Holmes' welcome shout from the front of the building. "All right, Watson, the constables are here." In a moment a wooden-faced gink appeared, who said he had come to relieve me. I put the revolver in my pocket and rejoined Holmes in the drawing-room, where I found him with Lord Lancelot and the others. "Well, boys, I've got 4 constables completely surrounding the castle now, 1 on each side, so we'll sit down to breakfast. It's nearly 9 o'clock now." And Holmes moved toward the dining room. "All right, old top," said Lancelot, smiling at the detective. "As long as George Arthur, the Earl, you know, is disabled or dead, I am the master of the house, and I'll back you up in everything you do. Even if I should happen to arrest you for stealing some of the cuff buttons yourself, eh? Queried Holmes with a grin, as we sat down to our delayed breakfast. Lancelot sort of choked at this, stared at the speaker, and said, "What queer things you do get off, Mr. Holmes. Your idea of a joke, I suppose." End of chapter 3.